This video is brought to you by Miniature Market. Thousands of board games, miniatures, and paints, discount prices at miniaturemarket.com.
Hey guys, Mike here, and welcome to this edition of War and Pieces. Today I am going to be reviewing a game from GMT Games called Fields of Despair. Fields of Despair is a World War I game, which really intrigues me because there's not that many World War I games out there. So when we found this one and Rob showed it to me, I thought, hey, this is pretty neat. Let me take a look at it. So I've taken a look at it, and I think it's got some very unique things to offer. Again, with this War and Pieces, I'm not going to go to like the depth that we go on some of the complex games like Squad Leader. This game is actually relatively easy to learn. The rulebook is really easy. It's got maybe, I think, 20 pages with lots of pictures and examples. So it's not an extremely complex game, which is great, but it does offer a great depth of strategy, which is really nice because it's not so rules heavy and table heavy that you're constantly going back to try to look things up. And actually, when I show you on the map, I'm going to kind of show you that if you do have to look something up, the game makes it very easy to find it and how to find it. So even if you do have to look something up every once in a while, it's not that hard. So the game, I think, offers some new, unique things. It's a block game, so you'll see the counters are in blocks, and it's also not a straight all-out conflict game. It really attempts to simulate some of the economic aspects of running World War I, which I think is unique, and I think it's great, and it really helps bring in some more of the flavor, especially when we look at like the submarines and the naval warfare and how they wreaked havoc on the Allied and Central Powers supply lines. So the game really kind of tries to simulate that, and I think it does a good job about that. So let's go down to the board. I'm going to kind of give you an overview of how it works, kind of show you what you get in the box, and then we'll come back up top and we'll talk about my final impressions of it, all right? See you down at the board. Okay guys, well here is a great look at Fields of Despair here. I got it out on the table here to kind of go through a couple things. But you know, component quality wise, top notch. But that's what we expect from GMT by now. I mean, GMT's counters, their component quality is just absolutely top notch. I mean, these little wooden blocks are just really nice. All the counters are nice and thick cardboard. We'll look at a couple of the other counters later. The map is just incredibly nice. Big hexes to get in, keep some, lots of nice tables on the side. So really, I think production quality wise, this game is really top notch. So what you get here is also kind of nice as well. The first thing that comes in that you're going to look for is the playbook. And in the playbook, it does what you think it does. It basically gives you the setups that you need for whatever campaign or whatever scenario you want to play. The nice part about Fields of Despair is it has an introductory scenario, which isn't too long. I haven't played it yet, but I believe that the full grand campaign will take you about 6 hours, they said, if everybody knows what they're doing. So if you're looking for that epic scale, Fields of Despair will definitely get you that. So what else do we have that comes for the players? The next thing I really love, and I love this because it gives both players here this instructional sequence sheet, just kind of a player aid, and it's got all of the sequences of play, it's got details about them, but what I really like about them is in any area that it talks about, order of play, or talks about like naval warfare sequences, it also lists out the rules section in the book, and I think that's great. So you're not hunting through the book. If you want to know, oh right, how do you reallocate supply? It's rule 6.7. You can immediately go to the book and boom, it gives you that, and you can read. So you're not hunting through the book. I'm constantly doing that when I'm trying to look up rules. So this is really nice. And the nice part is there's 2 of these in the box, so 1 for each player. So that's real nice. So you don't have to keep passing it back and forth. The other thing that each player gets is each player gets a player mat. And on the player mat, it's going to kind of denote your army statistics. It's going to talk about used and available artillery, how your air supply is doing. It's going to talk about your supply, how long your supply lines can be. You have your technologies down here in the bottom that you can look and you can advance and you can kind of research. So all of this stuff is kept for each player, and it's actually kept in secret behind this little screen that you'll have on both sides. And then even that on the inside gives you some of the more common tables that you would need, gives you the sequence of play, and gives you any, just some quick information, so you're not even having to look at the card all the time. You can use the just the player screen that each player has, and again, this goes on both sides. So what you're doing is you're actually keeping this information hidden from your opponent, so your opponent does not always know the strength and capabilities of your army. Which really, when we get into this, and I'm going to really kind of dwell on this when I get to the board here, is one of the things that the game does, and it tries to simulate in a great way, is the fog of war. The fact that the Central Powers and the Allied Powers did not know the entire strength of the opposing army. So it really does a good job about that. And again, especially when we talk about the counters and how the counters work, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on how they incorporate the fog of war into the game. Oops. All right, the last things that you get that you're going to use are these two little bags. And the two bags are used for naval warfare and the Eastern Front. Really, the way that this game simulates naval warfare, which again in World War I was big, especially with blockades and the U-boats, is you'll have these little cubes, which are also economic resources, but both players can allocate cubes to this bag, and you kind of put them in there in secret. And then during the naval phase, you'll see is we'll actually come in and you draw out of this bag, and based upon the cubes that you draw, they negatively affect the opponent's player's supply. So that's kind of a neat way that it's basically simulating the ships attacking the supply lines of the different powers. The red bag is used for the Eastern Front. And the Eastern Front, again, I'll get back into that when we start talking about the turn sequences a little bit. But those bags are nice. They're nice little drawstring bags, and they work pretty well. So when we get to the game itself, I'm going to just kind of go through how a turn works. I'm not going to play it out, but kind of show you some of the highlights. And again, what I like to show in these videos is what makes this war game different and unique compared to other war games that we've reviewed or other war games that you're used to playing. On this one here, you've got a number of tables that you've got to keep track of, which are nice. It's all right here. You've got when the United States is going to enter into the war. You've got how the naval warfare is going, how the Central Powers are dealing with the Eastern Russian front. You've got the track for the game turns throughout the year. It's going to start in 1914, and if you play the Grand Campaign, you'll go all the way to 1918. And then you've got, of course, your board with fortresses, and again, some mild country lines that it tries to shade in as well. So that's the general layout on the board. So the way that the turn works is the first thing that happens is there are conditions that will advance this USA entry track based on how aggressive the Central Power gets especially with its U-boats. This track continues to progress, and if you roll right, the United States is going to enter the war on the side of the Allied powers. The second thing that happens is they resolve the Eastern Front bag, and what they do is it's very similar to with the cubes, but instead of just using you also have, instead of just having blue and black cubes, when you do the Eastern Front, you also have these red cubes in there, and they simulate that the Central Power has to allocate resources and spend economic points to deal with the Russian front. So you pull out of this bag, and if you get so many of these red cubes, it modifies a die roll, which again simulates how well the Russians are combating the Central Powers. And the Central Power cannot neglect this, because if they do, if you draw 3 red cubes 3 times and they get these markers filled up, the Central Power automatically loses and the Allied player wins. So there's a bit of work that the Central Powers has to do to manage this. There's a way they can completely defeat them, but again, it's a way that to keep the Central Power, they have to always keep an eye on this, because if not, it's an automatic lose of the game. After that, then we get into the production phase. This war game really tries to simulate the economy of war, not just troop battles and troop fighting. So what happens is you're going to really deal, the whole phase is the production phase, is all about getting those small cubes, and there's tables to tell you what you get. But again, the small cubes kind of dictate actions and things that you can do with these different cubes. So as the central player and the allied player, you have to decide, do I want to put my cube into the naval warfare bag? Do I want to put the cubes, if the central power, do I want to put it into the Eastern Front bag? Or do I want to use it to spend on initiative? Or do I want to use it to spend to buy troops? You have to decide what you want to do. And then after you've got all of your tokens or your cubes, you have the naval warfare. And when the naval warfare comes out, then the player, as the cubes are drawn, they'll subtract resources from the player whose cube comes out of the bag. So it's a way to simulate, hey, the German submarines, the U-boats have gone in and they have sunk a number of ships. Therefore, those supplies did not make it to the Allied front. Again, they have a really neat thing there with the naval warfare, where the central power player can decide if they really want to go out and all-out attack and not differentiate between merchant boats and war vessels. And that's a big deal in World War I, because that's how the United States came in, is the U-boats kept sinking merchant ships. Well, they called them merchant ships, and that really got the Lusitania, and that got the United States into that war. So, again, it really tries to help simulate that. After that, you get into the action phase, where you've got the first player goes. And one of the nice things in this game is, World War I was the dawn of air power and airplanes in war. So they have these nice airplane tokens and this nice air track that you can use. And what you do, the main purpose of your planes is to recon, and you can use them to recon to see what's out there and to see the strength and try to determine the strength of the opposing army. However, if two planes happen to enter into the same hex, they have a dogfight. You have to and then whoever comes out of the dogfight, can either recon or they deter the airplanes. After that, you can then move your blocks. Spend some combat. What will happen then is the other player will go. You'll do that, so both sides will do the same thing. The recon, they'll move the blocks, they'll have combat. Then you do it again. So there's two action phases, and they're identical. So it would go initiative player, non-initiative player, initiative player, non-initiative player. And then you do some strategic reorganization, where you can move troops around the lines, and then you do it again. You'd move you up to the next year, and that's one whole turn. Now, a little bit about what we've got here on the board. There are two main things that make the game really tries, things that the game tries to emphasize. The first being fog of war, and how it simulates the fog of war is by these blocks. You can see here that on the blocks they have a sticker. The sticker represents how many troops are in that given hex. You can have 3 blocks in a hex, but the units could be anywhere from 1 to 20. And the way you simulate that is by rotating the block so that the number that you're looking for is on the top. So if I wanted an 11, 12, 10, whatever it is, I just have it rotated. So you could be sitting up against a 1, or you could be sitting up against a 20, and you don't know. The other nice thing that they include are these deception ones, where they have no unit power, but again, you don't know if it's a 1, you don't know if it's a 20. And they allow you during movement and during strategic realignment, if you wanted to say, okay, I'm going to put a bunch of blocks in here, okay, now I just take this off, I get a bigger number, and I put it there and I rotate it around. So I had a 7 and a 5 in here, and now I just bring in an 11, and here's my 11, and I just drop the 11 in there. So I still maintain the 3-block rule, but instead my troops went from only having 3 or 4 in there to now they have 20 something in there because I could put the different blocks in there. So that's neat because your opponent has no real idea what they're looking at. The second thing that the game likes to emphasize is supply. You have to be able to trace from either for the Central Power, the western edge, and for the Allied Power, the eastern edge of the map, through a continuous line to supply your hexes. And actually, you have to be able to supply that far as well. Your board will tell you how much supply you can supply to. So if you can only supply, say, 5 hexes, the central player can only supply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of these units would become out of supply. The out of supply only matters in that when you have a unit that's out of supply, they can move half and they fight with half power. So, and they can try to get themselves back into supply, but it's going to take them some movements and some realignments to get themselves back into supply. So again, it can even be a contested hex. See, even if it was like this, these guys could still technically have supply, but he would not have because he does not have that continuous line. So it really depends how, you can't advance and you can't get too aggressive because you've got to make sure your units stay in supply. And then the last thing that I like to talk about is what World War I is known for, trench warfare. The way it handles trench warfare is it says, okay, I know that in the beginning of the war, say from 1914 through, for that whole year of 1914, the war was fast. You had really fast, you moving tanks, you had infantry, you had troops moving throughout the war very rapidly. But what happened then is once you got later in the war, you had the trenches. And what the game does is it says, okay, fine. When you get to round 4, trenches exist. And when the trenches exist, everything slows down. Tanks can't move through the trenches as fast. The units have a defensive bonus now when they're fighting in hexes because of the trenches. So it really shows that trench warfare's effect on the speed of the game. It really took the speed of the game and slows down how rapidly these guys could move between fronts. So I think it does a good job about that. I'll probably talk about that here when we get back up top, about what the trench warfare, how they simulate it, and how good of a job it does. So this is what Fields of Despair looks like. It's a great World War I game. Let's go back up top, and I'll give you my final thoughts. So there you have it. There's Fields of Despair. I think it's a great game. The things I like the most about it, I think, are really the Fog of War. That Fog of War system to me is great. Now, I've seen other ones with the blocks where they don't get to see your troops, but to have the block represent anywhere from 1 to 20 and have the deception blocks is great because you're constantly looking at that going, I have no idea what's there. And because of that, it really puts the importance on being able to recon and recon well. So a lot of the times when you're playing, you've got to put resources and economic points against the air power so that you can recon, because the last thing you want to do is bring in some infantry or bring in some artillery and then just get completely mowed down because you don't know what's in front of you. I really like that. I think that it really tries to bring that theme home of what it was like in the early 1900s and what kind of communications you had and you didn't have. I really love how, when the planes meet each other, they have a dogfight. I imagine at this point in history, the rules of aerial combat are just being written. The things that these men would do at the beginning of the turn of the 1900s, 1915, 1916, will be the basis for aerial combat all the way through the Second World War into Vietnam, and into the future conflicts. It's written here, so there was no playbook. I mean, it simulates like the aces, like there's a Red Baron token, that helps, it gives you an extra advantage in combat. But it's really not the game changer the Luftwaffe is when you get to World War II. At this point, they're trying to figure out, what do we do with airplanes? So I think that's cool. But on the other side, they really knew what to do with ships. Ships had to disrupt supply lines, and the Central Powers do that great. I love it. Gives you the ability to say, how aggressive do I want to be as a Central Power when it comes to my naval warfare? Am I going to distinguish against merchant ships? And if I do, I'm less effective? Or am I just going to blow anything I see out of the water? If you do that, you're going to definitely hinder the Allied supply. When you start rolling on that table, the Allied supplies start really dropping down. But that American entry into the war track just keeps going up, up, and up. So it's just such a gamble you have to play, and I like that. I like giving the player the decision as to how risky they want to be. Do they want to just really, let's get this done now. Let's cripple the Allies. In which case, I'm not gonna worry about the Americans potentially entering because I'm gonna end it early. Or do you want to play it passive because you don't want the Americans to enter the war and just play a ground game? They give you that option. I think it's great. The other thing is trench warfare. I mean, you can't talk about World War I without talking about it. The game does a good job. I'm a little bit sketchy. The rule says after the fourth turn, all hexes become trenches. Now, I've only played solo. I need to bounce that rule across Rob. I couldn't find anything on BGG, but I need to look deeper on that. To me, that means the whole board turns into trench warfare at that point, which I think that's what it means. And if it does, wow, does that change the game. Those tanks can now only move half. The defender has such an advantage because they have extra dice. They have, when you have attrition, the attacker has to take first. They have to take units off before the defender. So really, the game is going to just come to a much slower pace, and the front line is going to change a lot slower. So depending upon the victory conditions of your scenario, you need to know that, hey, on the fourth turn, you had better have your troops as penetrated behind that line. You better have that supply chain set up and all supply line set up, and all that stuff has to be done before that fourth turn, because after that things are going to slow down. You can't move troops and tanks anywhere you want to move anymore because you just don't have the ability to move fast anymore. So while it does give you that, I just don't know if they really mean the whole board turns into a trench. So that's something, guys, you can leave in the comments, or again, I'll do some more research before I play with an opponent. I'm probably with Rob, but right now I've just played solo. And talking about solo, they have a great little handout that talks about how the AI works in this game, which it works pretty well. I tried to play against it just to get the feel so I could, give it a good review. And it's pretty neat. It gives you just kind of if this, if then do this, if this, then do that, which is nice. So, because really the game would be really broken if the only solitaire play was you play both sides, because one of the biggest aspects is the fog of war, which would be completely gone. So at least it gives you some of that flavor still, and it still kind of gives you a pretty decent AI and a pretty good solo experience, especially when trying to learn the game. So all in all, I think it's a good game. I really liked it. I think it brings new things to the table, such as the trench warfare, the really nice fog of war system, and really incorporating the economics of war into a war game, which I think is a nice touch, and it gives you a good feel of what the different sides were going through when they had to deal with these long supply runs back to the ports and had to deal with the Navy ships coming in and constantly harassing your supply lines. It does a good job about that. I look forward to playing this live. I think Rob and I are going to play this at some point. We kind of been moving it around the schedule. It's one of those games that we kind of have in our back pocket. So if I don't get finished with some painting at one time or something and we need to throw this on the table, I think we'd be ready to go. I'm not sure I can talk him into the 6-hour Great War scenario, but I'd love to get the intro scenario down just so we all get a great feel of it, and you guys can kind of see a little bit more when you're playing against each other what that looks like and how the secretness of the armies really change the strategies used by both of us. So guys, that is my edition of War and Pieces for this week. I hope you liked it. Please leave comments down below to tell me what you like, what you don't like, and again, if there's any war games out there that you've been dying to see, let me know. I'm not promising anything, but I got a couple games in the pipeline that I'm really looking forward to. One of them's back on the shelf there that I'm working on, which is Churchill, which I have been dying to play. So I can't wait to get that to the table. And again, next week you'll see the second module of ASL. So that'll be good. So we're going to get back to the table. We're going to get back in depth, and we'll learn all about artillery. All right? So until next week, I'm Mike, and I hope you guys had a great time. Thanks for watching.
Sponsored by Miniature Market's Review Corner. The Review Corner features podcasts, videos, and written reviews by gamers for gamers. Miniature Market, online gaming superstore, thousands of games and minis, discount prices. Check them out at miniaturemarket.com.